for this episode of the TechSpective podcast. I have with me GP. So GP, if you want to introduce yourself and give a little bit of background, and we can kick things off.
Hi, Tony. Thanks for having me. Hello, everyone. My legal name is Gurpartap, but I go by GP, and I lead our product security, AI, and data engineering team here at Adobe. And I've been here a really long time. I joined as a new college grad, and I've had no reason to leave. Such an amazing company.
Yeah, I mean, I guess quick digression side note, but I have actually noticed that about Adobe in particular, and there are a few companies, but in general, I see in the world of tech, in the world of cybersecurity, and my own personal career path, I mean, it's very volatile. It's people talk about job hopping, but it's not. I think for most people, it's not on purpose. They're not like going out looking, trying to switch jobs every 2 years. Just look at all the layoffs.
Yep.
So when I talk to someone who says, "Oh yeah, I've been here for 7 years. I've been here for 10 years. I've been here for 15 years." It's a testament to the company, I think, because most people have only been where they're at for less than 2 years, and then it's time to move on.
Yeah, no, it's a really special company. Honestly, it's even like friends who leave and go to other companies, they generally you generally hear back that it's a really, really special place.
Okay.
Anyway.
Go
ahead. No. I think we can launch into the topic now.
Okay. Well, it should come as no shock to any of the listeners of the TechSpective podcast that we're going to talk about some AI. Because that's pretty much all we've talked about for a year. But I wanted to have you on. I mean, I've had different people from Adobe on talking about different approaches and use cases and integrations of AI. But I wanted to talk, with you, kind of more specifically about Adobe's approach to integrating AI into its security frameworks, and then. So let's start there, and then I've got some other stuff I want to kind of dig into.
Yeah, no, I think Adobe is doing a really good job of trying to make sure that we stay informed in this new emerging space. So the way we think about this AI and security is it's kind of like a dual mandate. There's a lot of risks that come with AI, and there's also a lot of opportunities. And as security people, most of the time, our minds are wired to think about what can go wrong and focus on the risk, minimize the risk. And that is our primary function, right? Like cybersecurity in most companies is a governance function. You need to make sure you're minimizing risks and managing risk. However, with a powerful technology like AI, you can't just do that. You also have to flip your mind around a little bit and think about what can go right. And how do we start to leverage this really powerful technology to also make security better and easier for everyone involved?
Okay. I know, one of the things that was kind of the catalyst for me inviting you in the first place was you had given a presentation at the CSA Summit, and in the presentation and I'll link it in the podcast notes, but you mentioned a dual mandate. So can you elaborate on what that means for AI, in the context of security?
Yeah, absolutely. So generally, for security teams, the mandate is risk minimization and risk management. So we're always focused on what can go wrong, how do we make sure it doesn't happen, and if it does happen, what kind of controls do we have to get informed early, mitigate it, fix it. But with AI, we can't just stay focused on that. We also need to start figuring out how to leverage this game-changing technology at the same time in parallel. So that's kind of the way we've been thinking about application of the intersection of AI and security at Adobe is we can't just do one, we have to do both, and we have to do both at the same time.
Okay. Well, and so there's those two elements, and then I feel like there's like a 2.5 or a third element, which is the also protecting the AI itself. I mean, all of a sudden you start to hear more about data, LLM, data set poisoning, volumetric attacks, prompt injection attacks, all the ways that the more that we as a society rely on generative AI, which we very quickly have shifted to relying on, which quick digression, I guess, the pace at which this has been adopted and become mainstream is mind-boggling. Like, other technologies have come out, and it's first it's just the bleeding edge people who adopt it, and it takes a little while to kind of gain some traction, and and you have some time to kind of work these things out. With generative AI, like ChatGPT was announced, and immediately it was just mainstream. And now everyone has a generative AI tool, and Microsoft Build is going on this week, and they're rolling out 1,000 different ways to use Copilot, and it's just so it went very quickly from only like the the tech intelligentsia even knew what it was, to we've publicly announced it, and now the whole world just relies on it. And the more that that's true, the more that we rely on it and we expect its responses to be accurate or valid, the greater risk we face from anyone messing with that AI.
Yeah, no, that's a really, really good point, because in most of the other technology waves, as we've seen with the internet and mobile, it's generally moves at a fairly decent pace. This is the AI rate of adoption and mainstream embedding has been a lot faster. If you think about it, ChatGPT was released late November 2022, and I remember we were trying to build some AI apps back then. The context window was 4K tokens, and
Right.
we're already up to 2 million tokens with Gemini, and 128K with GPT-4 Turbo at this time. So it is evolving really, really rapidly, and you bring up some really good points. So the way the bucket that we're putting all of this stuff into is the risks. These are the new risks that come with it. So we have the traditional security risks of authentication, authorization, SQL injections, and cross-site scripting types. With the use of AI, things like data poisoning and prompt injection, these kinds of things just become those additional risks that you have to understand and mitigate against. One of the things that I actually recently, Anthropic, which is a company that they produce LLMs called the Claude series models, but they're mostly focused on interpretability and safety of AI models. And they released a very interesting paper a few months ago related to sleeper cells, where they did not prove it with pre-training data. It was fine-tuning data. They were able to train the model in such a way where there were some trigger words. And if you pass those trigger words, the model would not perform the way we would expect it to. So in the context of security, if we start putting these models to do our threat detection, and this is what the WAFs rely on, this is what everything relies on, if there is data poisoning over there, it's not a huge leap of imagination to see how some of this stuff can be abused. And as we come to rely on this more, I think there's a lot more work to do in terms of AI safety research. There's a lot of grants that, to their credit, these companies are offering. But I completely agree with you that the speed at which it is moving, we really need to accelerate our safety and interpretability research in this space to make sure that we are not getting into something with our eyes closed.
Right. Well, and it's there's the standard trajectory of new technologies is they come out, there's some adoption, they gain mainstream status, And at some point they hit a critical mass where then we all wake up and go, oh, we should probably secure that. And we've had to go through the same thing, I think, with AI, where it's like, and you would think we would have learned by now to take a look at that earlier in the process, but it's, I think, just human nature that, a cool new thing is invented, and the first thing you want to do is just figure out, okay, what are all the possibilities for this cool new thing? What are all the potential things I can do with this cool new thing? And it's not until after it has kind of been embedded into the mainstream that we go, okay, how do we protect it now? And so now I'm starting to, I'm having more conversations with vendors about, where they've got tools that they're working on or actively deploying now that are designed to protect the AI models, protect the algorithms, protect the data sets. And some of those things are just repackaging. Some of it's just like, we already have things that protect data, and we already have, it's just a marketing flip to say, oh, and now we're going to use it to protect the AI data set. But it's still valid. It's still valid to say that we need to protect these things because, again, if I rely on it, it was just in the news like this past week with the Donald Trump trial going on in New York that. One of the things that his former attorney, Michael Cohen, had done was he had submitted this legal brief, or he had helped his lawyers submit this legal brief, and it cited these court cases. And when the court reviewed the brief, they were like, these court cases don't exist. And they went back and they were like, why are you citing court cases that don't exist? And what happened is Michael Cohen thought he would expedite things by using, generative AI. I think he used, Google Bard or something to, say, and just said, hey, get me some court cases that are relevant to this. And it just invented them. And he didn't go through and verify it. And I've done that myself. It's gotten better over time. But last summer, when I kind of first started playing with ChatGPT, I did a thing where I had asked it, and I've talked about it in a former podcast as well. But I asked it to write an article about a thing. I was just testing what it could do, and I said, make sure you include quotes from experts and cite relevant sources. And it did it. And if you've just read the article, it was a pretty decent article. It was, informative, and it had quotes from known and respected experts, and it had links to known and credible, websites and resources. And so then I did the additional work and said, okay, let me go find this quote. Where is this quote from? When did this person say this? And because there were quotes from people names that I knew. And I went on Google, and that quote doesn't exist as far as Google knows. And then I clicked on the links, to find out, okay, well, what are these links that we're citing? And they went to 404 pages, even though they were links to like NPR.com, Bloomberg.com, NBCnews.com. And so they looked like very credible, legitimate links, but they were completely fabricated.
Yeah, I think that we've been calling that hallucinations all this time. And I think this is where doing expectation setting for the technology that is being used is really important. Because what these things, like the simplest way that I try to explain these things to like non-technical friends is, think of them as parrots that have gone through the entire internet. So they don't really have a concept of like true or false or anything of that sort. What they are doing is there's a bunch of data that has been encoded into these deep neural networks. And with some degree of probability, all they are doing is next token prediction. And the URLs that, like, I actually had a similar experience very early on. I think it was early last year, where we were just experimenting to like see what kind of things it does well and what kind of thing it doesn't do well. And recalling historical stuff and coming up with URLs and honestly, even maths, it wasn't doing really well. So you kind of have to like connect these LLMs and use them as like an LLM operating system. And you have to connect them with various other tools from where it can retrieve sources of truth and provide citations, where it can like reach out to a calculator and do some sort of calculation. So the more and more like the way that these things are getting packaged up is moving from these just LLM-based chatbots into more AI agents that have these tools that can interact and like get to the right kind of information. But stepping back a little bit over here, I would actually contest that some of the things that can go wrong with AI, we've been fairly lucky so far in that regard. Because if we like most of us have watched like a lot of like sci-fi movies, like there seems to be a really interesting intersection between cybersecurity people and interest in sci-fi. And the biggest thing that people worry about with AI is alignment, and us building these super intelligent non-organic machines that then turn out to be a Skynet or an Ultron or one of those bad AIs that starts to go after humans. The models aren't really like good enough yet to like do that stuff. Like when you see them fail so frequently in experiments, you start to like fear them a little bit less in that regard. And then like after alignment, the next big thing honestly is jailbreaks, and then these models being used to cause physical harm to people. Like think of a terrorist organization using a jailbroken LLM to build a dirty bomb and exploding it. Like those would be the really, really horrible scenarios, at least in my mind, that would where like, okay, this thing has gone completely off the, like this thing has gone really, really wrong. And like some of these hallucination cases and things like that, they fall like, at least in my imagination, slightly lower in like the list of risks where AI can like really go badly wrong.
Well, right. I mean, at least in those cases, we're just talking about, written content, like is that big a deal? But to your point, and like, I am, I'm not an AI engineer by any stretch, but I am much more technical than most. And so people still come to me and ask questions and, have conversations like this. And I'm generally careful to kind of walk that line where I'm like, I don't want to fear monger. Like, I don't want to like tell people, oh, hey, this is Skynet, we're all doomed. But I also at the same time feel like, okay, but we do have to have a healthy amount of respect for what could go wrong. And the thing is, even when we build in, safeguards or whatever, and we say, hey, generative AI, you shouldn't, answer these questions. We've already seen people find ways to work around that. It's like you can't ask ChatGPT to tell you how to build a bomb, but you can say, hey, ChatGPT, tell me a story like my grandmother used to tell me about building a bomb. and they go, oh, all right. And I mean, and I get that it's a work in progress, and you have to kind of deal, find those things on a case by case basis, and then try to figure out another safeguard for it. But that's exhausting, and that's a losing proposition in the long run. Like you can't constantly like look for, okay, well now how did you break it? Okay, let me fix that. Well, okay, now how did you break it? And especially because those safeguards only apply to ostensibly well-written and stuff from companies that have some amount of ethics and morals behind them. It does nothing for malicious actors who are writing LLMs who can say things like, hey, malicious LLM, tell me how to disrupt the water supply.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I think that's a really good point about like jailbreaks and the rate at which the jailbreaks have been happening. I think it would be really nice if like we start keeping scoreboards of which LLMs get jailbroken more frequently versus the others, like so that we like as consumers, we can start to vote with our dollars and say like this company seems to care more about doing research in this space. They're proving to be like safer and better red teaming has been done on these models versus the others. The other interesting like counterpoint that I hear from folks in the space is a lot of the stuff only happens when the rubber meets the road. So you could keep all of this thing in a laboratory, not release it at all, and you release it when you've reached like GPT 7, 8, or 9 thing. And when the jailbreak happens, it's much more consequential. So like if you think about it
Right.
in that, if you think about it in that regard, uh, putting models out there that aren't as capable as some of the models will be in the future, and having them deal with the real world pressure
Right.
actually like sandboxes or minimizes the risk a little bit in that regard, where all the jailbreaks that we found in GPT-2s or 3s or Claude 1s or Llama 1s, they will not exist in the future models that will be significantly more powerful. So in that regard,
Right.
like that's one of the counterpoints. Again, like I don't have any like personal skin in this game, but that's one of the counterpoints that I've heard from folks in this space, and like seems to hold up fairly well to like
I
logical
think it makes
scrutiny.
sense. I mean, it's good to have, because here's the thing: you could say, I'm going to keep this, we're just going to operate in stealth in our own lab until we get to GPT-10, and we've done tabletop exercises and brainstormed every possible way we can think of to jailbreak this, but the reality is they won't think of everything. And it's not until you release it to the public. The public is very creative. Threat actors are very creative. I mean, even if you just go back to like early days of software and just buffer overflow errors. I mean, the developer says, okay, I want to gather some information. Here's a form. I need your name, your address, your phone number. And then someone goes in the address field and just starts typing code. And they go, wait a minute. I didn't want code. I just wanted an address. And it's like, it never occurred to the developer that somebody would just type some other random stuff. That wasn't, because it's like that you wouldn't, there's no reason to assume that would happen, except for that now we know better. So yeah, I mean, if you do wait until GPT-10, hopefully you've thought of more things, but you still won't have thought of everything. And so it does make sense, I think, that I wasn't aware of that logic, but I think that logic makes sense that when you release it earlier, it's less capable, but you also have this feedback loop that hopefully by the time you get to ChatGPT-10, you've worked out all of the at least easy scenarios. I mean, you're still not going to be invulnerable.
Yeah, and I think the same thing kind of holds up to like our like current and traditional software too, right? Like we do a lot of like shift left stuff, we do like static analysis, we do internal pen testing, we do internal red teaming. But at the end of the day, most companies still get a lot of bugs from their bug bounty program. So we actually, like in our previous office space where we used to sit, we had this like huge banner that said, all of us together are smarter than any one of us alone. And when it comes to like things like cybersecurity and AI safety, I think it's an area where like companies aren't really competing. We either all win together or we all lose together. So that's why I think there's a lot more knowledge sharing, and like we have like such a rich history of like people like doing detailed write-ups about how they exploited bugs, and detailed write-ups about how they made software behave in ways that it wasn't supposed to. So yeah, like when I heard that piece, like it actually like made a lot of sense, where I was like, maybe some of these people are moving a little bit too fast, but like the sense that like, hey, these are like significantly less capable than some of the stuff we're going to have in the future. So let's like pressure test this with the real world.
And there's also in that same vein, there's also a difference between, and I think we do this with every like all types of software and technology, where it's like it's one thing for me to have access to it, or for the dry cleaner on the corner to have access to it, or whatever. It's not that problematic until you get to the point where it's being deployed in critical infrastructure or it's being deployed at a government or military level. I mean, that's when, it's like if the government said, hey, you know what, generative AI, it could respond to a threat much faster than we can. Let's just put ChatGPT in charge of the nuclear arsenal. That's how you end up with war games. That's how you end up with Whopper.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a really, really good point, because with things that you have that are newer, that you have less confidence in, you always have to think about what is the cost of it going wrong. If the cost of it going wrong is on like an internal support Slack channel, it provided an answer that wasn't completely accurate, like not the worst thing in the world. But if the example you gave, right, like you've said like, oh, this thing is amazing, let's connect it to our nuclear arsenal, and then like something goes haywire, like, yeah, not a good day for humanity.
Well, it's like, and you mentioned there's a significant Venn diagram of cybersecurity and technology with sci-fi geeks and stuff. It's like it is a prevailing theme that when you get to a sentient AI in sci-fi tropes, that the sentient AI very quickly decides that the human race is actually the biggest threat to the human race. So even when you tell the AI, okay, I need you to protect the human race, the logical solution to that is, well, you need to wipe out the human race.
Yeah, well, we have examples of those, right? Like with Skynet and Ultron, like even in the movies, Ultron kind of came to that conclusion over there. But we also have counter examples of like Jarvis and Vision and things like that. So
right.
Not all sci-fi is completely dark and like anti-technology. But I think like we should take that very, very seriously, because the cost of that going wrong is very high. So we really need to be very careful. But the one thing I will say is like working with these models for a year now and doing it every day and seeing them fail to like do certain things, the more you understand something, the less you tend to fear it. So like there are things that I'm like really, really concerned about with AI, but this like sense of like it will become sentient tomorrow and like start to go after humanity, I think like at least like based on some of the behaviors that I'm seeing, like I don't think we're close to that at all.
Right.
The more serious stuff like is jailbreaking, and then honestly like the second big one, like it's a massive election year in many countries, including here in the US, is deepfakes. Like earlier we had like just text to image, now we're getting text to video. Voice cloning is possible with like 10-15 second clips of someone. And I think like deepfakes is another area where I can see like I can see that being a more immediate risk, and it already is proving to be in other elections this year, than like some of the sentient AI, the Skynet,
Right.
and the Ultron problem.
No, I mean that's completely fair, and I mean I think there's I think there will always be a generational aspect where there's new technology that younger generations understand better. I feel like that's particularly crucial right now in light of what you were just talking about, because there's a large block of voters, and I'm looking specifically at the United States, but a large block of voters in the 60 plus age range who are just they most of them just got a handle on the internet and figuring out how to use their smartphone, and they're not equipped to understand the concept of deep fakes or recognize them as potential issues. I've made the point in the past that it's just even me to some extent, but definitely my father and my grandparents or whatever grew up in an era where like you didn't have to question those things. When you watched the news and you watched Walter Cronkite or you watched even Ted Koppel, you accepted that what they said was true, and there was no reason to think that the journalist had an agenda and that there was, they were in any way trying to skew your opinion or whatever. And I think most of the older generation hasn't been trained out of that. So they still think, well, if I see it, then it must be true.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I think in general, right, like for humans, like we're creatures of habit, and like especially with like areas where people kind of have their minds already made up, we're more likely to believe things that basically reinforce our biases. So if we see a deep fake that reinforces our biases, we're very, very likely to be like, yep, that's true. I knew it all along. So I think a lot of this stuff actually like has like a social engineering aspect to it too. It kind of like plays on our biases and our like psychology. And I'm not here to like specifically like plug stuff, but I think this is an important thing for folks to know is huge props to all the companies that have formed this coalition around adding digital signatures to all the content that gets generated from text to image. So we've been doing it from the beginning for our like text to image models,
Right.
Firefly. And honestly, like our team here has done such an amazing job of building this coalition across various companies. And it's really like these kinds of things are always really heartening to see, where companies that are competing against each other for like market share still realize that these kinds of things are a common problem for all of us, and we need to work together, not against each other. So I think like C2PA, content authenticity, content credentials, like really good start, not perfect, but we really need to invest and spend a lot more time in those cases where we give people tools, because like to the naked eye, we can't tell if something is deep fake or real. Like it's not a core expertise for most of us, and less so than like some of the other folks. So having the right kind of tools, especially in the channels through which we consume this stuff, that clearly say that, oh, this isn't real. This is like generated with AI with this specific tool at this specific time, and this was a prompt that was used to generate it. So I think we really need to step back and rethink like how we consume content, how we distribute content as a society in this kind of age.
Well, for real. I mean, and my kids and my wife have been on TikTok for a while. I didn't get on TikTok until more recently, but the thing, and I guess it doesn't even necessarily apply only to TikTok, because it's also true on Instagram and Snapchat and YouTube and whatever. But I've always viewed those things with a skeptical eye, because my first question, my wife and I were just talking about this the other day. I said, when I see something and it's like this video of something that like is like shocking or whatever, my first thought is, okay, but why were you videoing? Why does this video exist? Because shocking things happen all the time that aren't caught on camera. So like, why did it get caught on camera and then you posted it on TikTok? I'm like, so I'm skeptical of the premise of every video from the get-go, because I'm like, no, this is totally staged. All of this is staged, because there's no reason for you to have been videoing this. But that is a cynical mindset, and it not everyone does that. But I just said on a recent podcast that I've come to this realization recently that the internet was supposed to be this like magical democratizing thing where like, oh well, now we all have access to all of the information in the world. This is great. I can push some buttons and I can get answers. I can just Google things and all of the information of the world will come to me. That has backfired. Because kind of going back to the Walter Cronkite thing, when I was in high school, we had Encyclopedia Britannica or World Book or whatever. That was the source of truth. You pulled the book off the shelf, you looked up the answer, whatever the answer it said was, that was a correct answer, and you knew that you could rely on that answer. But now, if I Google the same exact question and I get an answer, I can't accept it at face value. I now have to go do further research and find 10 other sources to corroborate that answer before I can trust it. So it's like we actually went backwards. Now instead of just getting an answer, I get homework.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point. So maybe I'm a little too much of an optimist over here. So like, again, that intersection of sci-fi and security geeks, I'm going to use like a Professor Charles Xavier quote here. Just because someone stumbles and loses their way doesn't mean they're lost forever. I think we might be in a temporary dip as we figure out how to use and uh, uh, understand these capabilities better. I think in the long run, like this sense of like shared connectivity, the internet, I still see it as a huge positive. So
Yeah.
I'll give you a couple of examples. So I grew up in India, and like I would connect to like via the dial-up modem. So I am like that old now, and started following this like soccer team based in North London. So it has been like a positive thing, and I've like made friends over the internet who live in different places. So like there are like counter examples of where it has proven like certain positive aspects too in terms of connectivity. Like I live here in San Francisco, like even with like the mobile age, right? Like finding cabs here was like notoriously hard. Uber's completely changed that. Is it all positive? Like with all these things, right? Like the way I like view these things is they always change things. They make certain aspects slightly better. They make other aspects slightly worse. And it's up to us as a society to make sure that the aspects that it's making better, we tend to like figure out a way to like enable them more, and the things that it's making worse, we figure out a way to like suppress or eliminate those kinds of things. So and again, like I could be just a more like techno optimist than
I mean, I
most
agree
folks
with
in
you, and
security.
I agree with you, and I've had conversations. So I mean, I have 7 kids, and I mean they're all adults now. But I've had conversations over the years with people who talk about how horrible technology is because all the kids are just on they're just gaming now, and they're always on their phones, and they're not out socializing and making friends. I'm like, okay, they're not outside making friends the way you made friends 20 years ago. That doesn't mean they're not making friends. My kids have friends that they met through gaming platforms 15, 20 years ago that they're still friends with. They're friends with people they've never met in person. That they've just been friends for a decade plus. I mean, so like just because it's not going outside and riding a bike is not doesn't mean that it's not there's no value there. Like they still have social connections, and in fact it is empowering, it's enabling in that way, because if I send my child outside to play, they've just got the like 7 or 8 kids that are on this block to choose from, who they may like, they may not like. Maybe they don't have any similar interests. At least they can go online and they can find people they vibe with. They can find their tribe and connect with people that have a more meaningful connection. So the ability to go play outside and ride your bike with a kid that you don't even like is not necessarily better than finding your tribe online and forming a meaningful connection.
Yep. No, that's a really fair point. And and it does allow you to like kind of be yourself more, and like you don't have to like conform to wherever like whatever like physical situation you might be in at any moment.
And you've referenced Jarvis. I mean, it's going on over a decade now that I've been talking about Jarvis. And basically from the advent of the Alexas and the I can't say her name because then she'll wake up. But from the advent of those things, I've been talking about Jarvis and basically saying, look, when are we going to get to I want Jarvis. I want Iron Man's Jarvis, where like I'm like, what we have is very rudimentary. It's basically just a voice activated chat bot that is just doing very rudimentary things. Where we're going, hopefully, I mean, I think we are making progress in this way, especially if you look at like what ChatGPT, just unveiled.
Omni model, right? With
Yeah,
the
right.
tone
But
and everything.
and being able to converse and having a level of emotion in the interaction. But ultimately, I want for the voice assistant on my smartphone not just to be smarter and be able to give me better answers and interact better, but to literally learn to be my assistant, like my. My SIRI
Yeah.
should be different than yours. It should be different than my wife's. It should be different. Like it should learn me over time. It should know what foods I like, what foods I don't like. It should know what movies I like, what movies I don't like, so that the answers I get are mine. And it becomes literally my digital concierge, my digital personal assistant that isn't just a chat bot to the to a search field, but that literally understands me and knows what medications I'm taking and like all the things, because Jarvis doesn't just respond to Tony Stark. Jarvis is an equal in those conversations. Jarvis is suggesting things and noting things and saying, hey, you know what, you might want to chill out there, and different things. And it's like that kind of AI I think would be great.
Yeah, and I think we're slowly headed in that direction. So I'm currently doing a 6-month rotation from our security team into our developer platform. And I'm actually getting to see how software building itself is changing. And like the way we're thinking about some of the things we're trying to build over there, it actually feels very much like Tony Stark's Jarvis, where it's not just like a text-based like chatbot where it is like doing some sort of like information retrieval. It's able to like tell you when something goes wrong. It's like, hey, there's ice forming on your suit. You might want to like reduce altitude and things like that. So we're actually thinking about it in like two-way conversation. And like when you're trying to like write some code and like there's some like bug, it tries to auto correct some of the bugs in your code. And similarly in security, we're doing similar stuff with like you try to basically automatically rewrite code. So most of the time in security, like what we do is we find problems, we add them to a backlog, and then the engineering team has to go spend all their time like fixing those. That's a pretty good application of AI. Like none of the developers actually like spending their time, like they all want to spend their time building cool features. They don't want to spend their time like fixing like straightforward bugs. Like we're already starting to see like fairly decent utility there of AI where it can like look at a bug report, like see where it is in code, automatically rewrite the code, submit a PR. And then in certain cases, like there's a second bot that wakes up and reviews that PR and provides feedback. So we're really starting to get into those like multi-agent AI workflows where it does feel more like Iron Man Jarvis versus like the more rudimentary like chat GPT type where you're just asking it a question and getting an answer back, or a RAG application where you've connected it to a vector store of your content and it's retrieving that content.
Right.
It is starting to get a lot richer in that regard with tool usage and agents.
Because I did an interview last summer at some point. It was I forget who, but someone had some artist had created a deep fake audio of someone else. And I mean that's happened a bunch of times, and they're generally pretty convincing. I mean it just happened recently with this battle between Drake and Kendrick Lamar when Drake did the deep fake of Tupac and Snoop Dogg, and it sounds pretty authentic if you just listen to it. But I did this interview and they were talking about like the threat of of generative AI and all this and the kind of the magic of it. And I was like, all right, well, let me just stop you there because there's nothing magic about it. I mean, it doesn't have access to information you don't. It's just a different interface for accessing Google. It's just searching the internet faster than you and giving you an answer. So it's like, it's not magic. It can't really do anything you can't.
Yeah, so I think that's the that's the other really interesting point, right? Because where we are with these models right now, right? Like they're able to duplicate. You're absolutely right. Like they're trained on data that like has been created by humans, so it's based on that. And they are basically like able to mimic it, and with tool usage, we're basically allowing it to like click on buttons. There's a really cool project actually, like I encourage folks to look up, is Open Interpreter, where they're actually trying to connect like a natural language interface to your operating system. They've been working on it for a year, like one of my favorite like open source projects in AI right now. So right now it's like a mimicking system, but I think the real power will start coming in when we start to get to models that help us reason and find solutions that we haven't thought through ourselves for problems. Like right now, it's like I said, right? Like it's a parrot that's been trained on the internet. It's just going to like revert back whatever was in its training data set or whatever we decided to exclude with reinforcement learning. But the real meaningful thing will be when like these AI models are able to help us find creative ways to deal with our current problems like climate change and like abundance of energy, abundance of like resources for everyone to live. So I think those will be that will be the more interesting stuff. Right now, you're like absolutely spot on. Like it's able to mimic what we're already able to do. It's a convenience and productivity tool at the moment.
Okay. Well, all right. So we've covered a broad range of AI stuff. I'm going to bring it back a little bit more specifically to kind of what you're doing within Adobe. So like, with all of these things in mind, and actually you alluded to one of the questions I was going to ask was in relation to AI generated disinformation. So you've already covered that for me, and we could take that one off of my list. But in terms of issues like poisoning the training data and kind of protecting AI models, are there any like specific steps Adobe is taking to protect AI?
Yeah, so just to set a little bit more context over here, so like the current AI boom kind of like fits into two different like model types. One is this large language models, the GPTs, the llamas, and the Claudes types. And then we have the text to image models that are based on diffusion. So that's the area where most of our models exist. So the Firefly series and like the generative fill in Photoshop, things like that. So the first thing, like the disinformation was an area where we're not just doing the right thing ourselves, trying to build a coalition so that we can come to some degree of like standards where we are able to tell the difference between like real and AI generated. The second piece that where we took a interesting strategy was the models that we released, we used data from our stock offering. So Adobe has like an offering called stock, which is basically stock images. So most of our stuff, the models are trained with that, and that one makes it commercially safe. And secondly, because it doesn't have a lot of content that you don't want to generate deep fakes for, because it doesn't know like doesn't have like a lot of the context about like current celebrities or other types of content that you would get if you just like scan the entire internet for images. We did not have it in our training data itself. So I think Adobe did a really smart move over there where instead of just like rushing and like trying to follow suit with what everyone else was doing, we decided to train our models on our stock images that helped us make sure that the training data itself was fairly good. So that was one move that we made. And then on the LLM side, like we're doing fairly like high level of vetting before we get allowed to use specific LLMs for specific use cases, because both internal and external stuff, we have to use LLMs to build these kinds of assistants. So over there, like we're security, privacy, legal assessments to ensure that we don't take any like missteps over there.
Okay. All that sounds very good. The other thing that you've already discussed some is kind of the collaboration among companies, and I would say too that I think that that's a good step, and I've we've had the same sort of thing just in the general world of cybersecurity, where there are different things where it's like there's a broad recognition that we're all in this together.
Yep.
And so there are certain things where it's like, okay, it just makes sense for us to share this threat intelligence or whatever. There are certain things that it makes sense to share amongst competitors. Yep. And then you find a different, you differentiate yourself in another way. You say, okay, here's the baseline. We're all going to share this, and we're all going to work together on this. And then I'm going to differentiate myself in this other way. And I think that has to be true here too, because like you said, there's a lot that can go wrong. So it would be very nice if the OpenAIs, Microsofts, Googles, Adobes, whoever, everyone who's working on, moving LLM, and generative AI technology forward, if everyone's working together on addressing kind of the fundamental problems, and then you figure out how to differentiate on top of that.
Yeah, and I think most people recognize that, right? Like cybersecurity, AI safety, these kinds of things, like we're all in this together. Like it's this is not the dimension along which you compete on. There's other dimensions you compete on.
Okay. All right. Well, so as we wrap up, I mean, you've talked about your optimism, and again, I will reiterate that in general, I also try to talk people off the ledge in terms of the Skynets and stuff, and say, hey, let's focus on Jarvis and not on Skynet. But I do think that we still have to have a kind of an awareness in the back of our mind of, okay, well, what could go wrong, and let's make sure we've factored that in. But with all of that in mind, kind of, what do you see as the kind of the most promising advancements, for cybersecurity, with AI, and going forward?
Yeah, so I think that the areas like again, like huge kudos to the entire Adobe security team. I think we've done a fairly good job of starting to adopt some of this and experiment in different areas. So the first thing I talked about earlier, like auto-generating code fixes. My team actually just did a talk a couple of weeks ago at B-Sides SF, where we're able to do that fairly well in like certain like types of bugs that we were getting very commonly. We're able to use these LLMs to automatically rewrite code and like open PRs for people to review. The second area that I'm really excited about, which I spend a lot of my time doing threat models, and it's a thing we've never been able to scale because it like requires you to understand architecture diagrams, and OCR technology was never very good. But some of these like vision models right now, they do a much better job of understanding architecture diagram and then reasoning on top of them. So one of our teams here has actually been experimenting with, can we figure out a way to use these multimodal LLMs to scale and automate threat modeling? So still work in progress, not perfect, not the best threat models I've ever seen produced, but at the same time, not the worst threat models I've seen ever produced. So that is an area that I'm like with the multimodality, and I don't know if it's just like a Adobe employees' affinity towards images, but the multimodal capabilities to understand these architecture diagrams, I'm really excited about. And obviously, like um, classification and reasoning is another area where we're using it, where we push a lot of like text-based reports through it and like let it reason through and like give us information about what's going on in the real world in the schema and the formats we want, rather than having to like do that manually or like read all the reports and like at least just have it in your head. So we actually push a bunch of that stuff through like language models, do some classification and schema extraction. So we can actually see like trends over time. So we turn like a bunch of like text-based reports into like graphs and trend lines that give much easier insights into what's going on, rather than having to read a ton of text-based reports and then maybe putting those like maybe joining those dots together in our head.
Right. Yeah. All right. Well, I want to thank you for taking the time to chat. I think it was a good conversation. It's all very interesting, and it's all I think one of the things we need to kind of keep reminding people is it's also early. Like it is as amazing as all of this seems. We're really kind of in version 1.0, if that.
Yeah, I think we're in version like 0.7. Yeah, so totally agree with you. Super early. And I think like this is the time where all of us getting involved, experimenting, and enable, like one of the things that I feel very strongly about is you always end up learning more when you're doing stuff hands-on with a piece of technology rather than just like reading stuff. So if there's like one thing I can encourage folks to do is like, yes, you're reading about like AI stuff, but all companies like give free developer credits now with this stuff. Try it out for yourself and play around with it, because all of us together are smarter than any one of us alone. Maybe you'll think of something that other people have not yet, and we will all be better off for it.
Awesome. All right. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Tony. Bye-bye.
Bye. I appreciate you investing your time to listen to the podcast, but I also invite you to engage on social media. Please go like our Facebook page and follow at TechSpective on Twitter and Instagram. You can feel free to let me know what you like, let me know what you don't like, let me know if you love it, let me know if it sucks, and let me know what products you'd like to see reviewed or what questions you'd like to see answered in future posts.